How to make a radial gutter thumb spica. First, we're going to make dots at the palmar crease and the thumb IP. So we're going to connect the thumb IP line to the palmar crease line, making a half oval shape there. And then we're going to make another half oval shape here from the other side of the IP of the thumb IP line. And these two shapes are going to overlap around each other to keep the thumb in place. Now we're going to continue the line down the forearm, trying to get 2/3 of the forearm. We're going to connect those lines together. And the forearm material should wrap around about halfway around the forearm. So halfway around the circumferential forearm. Here you want to continue the line to about where the middle finger of the distal palmar crease is. We cut out the tracing and tried putting it on the patient, but it was too small. So now here we are redrawing the design and making it much bigger so it is a better fit onto the patient. Here we are retesting the fit, and as we can see here, the thumb area overlaps just fine and the material wraps about halfway around the circumferential forearm. Now here we are measuring approximately the amount of material we need, as I'm making dots here, and then I'm gonna use a box cutter to slice the lines together, and it'll be easier to take out the material. Then once the slab is taken out, we trace the design, and here I'm adding extra space just in case if the splint is too small. But because of this, it ended up being too big, which is fine because we ended up cutting it off anyway. After tracing the slab, you can place it in hot water and then you can cut it off easier. When you're cutting, make sure you use long snips of the scissors to prevent any rugged edges of the material. Now, when placing it on, make sure to pat dry and then test the temperature. Have the patient in a neutral position, keep the wrist straight, and make sure the thumb is in slight palmar abduction and opposition. Now, from the radial side, you're going to connect the two ends of the material together, overlapping by about 1/2 inch to 1 inch, as I'm doing here. So I'm overlapping here, and as I overlap, I begin to smooth out uh, the area of the material right here. I'm smoothing it out so it's a better fusion here. So that's what I'm doing. And then the splint material here, there's a big airspace in there. So now I'm adding pressure on the radial side of the thumb around the CMC and pushing it down to conform the material onto his hand. So now, as you can see, it's a much tighter fit. It's much more conform to his body. And I'm also adding pressure to the volar side around the thenar eminence, so that molds well. And then here, I'm just checking his opposition, if he's able to oppose his thumb and to wiggle his thumb, so there is room, so it's not too tight in the thumb area. And just taking time, making sure it's a good fit, making sure there's enough material around the web space and that the web space is being conformed properly as well. And just constantly just check if there's any spaces throughout the splint, any pockets of air throughout the splint. And now it's pretty much done. It's conformed pretty well. But as you can see, the splint is kind of big. It does travel a bit more than 2/3 of the forearm, and it does cover more than half the circumferential forearm. So then we're going to make lines and cut out the extra material. Also, make sure that the patient keeps the wrist in a neutral position and the thumb stays in opposition. Sometimes they may begin to move it during the splint application. Therefore, you should always check upon any subtle movements of the wrist and thumb. Now here we are going to make adjustments, and the adjustments will begin with measuring about the right distance of material to remove so that the material wraps around halfway around the circumferential forearm, and so that is 2/3 the length of the forearm. As you can see, I'm making the lines here and making those approximates to have the right size and fit. And then we're going to cut out the material, and preferably it is better to be done when the material is already cold. If you replace it into the water, it might cause the splint design to reconform, and you might lose the shape that you originally had. So it is better to cut the material when it's already cold. And then we place it back on, and we look for any rough edges, as I am showing here. And then we're going to round out those sharp edges. So one was there, and another one was right here. And again, it's better to cut it when it's cold. Now we're going to retest the fit after removing all the sharp edges, which we do here. And then you want to replace the edges of the splint into the hot water to round it out. And any sharp edges you want to kind of rub with your finger. Imagine like it's sandpaper and you're rubbing all the edges and making sure there's no sharp edges. And then for the thumb part, you want to not just smooth it out, but you want to round it out. So here I'm rounding it out so it is a more comfortable fit onto the patient. As you can see now there's rounds, and I'm using long finger motions as I'm making the rounds. And now here I'm placing marks on where I'm going to put the straps. We're going to have one strap here on the distal end, one on the middle, and one on the proximal end of the splint. And now I'm heating up the Velcro straps, so it's more of a fused fit. This is the distal end, and then here is in the middle, and then here is the proximal end. So we're going to have 3 straps that go around the splint. Here I'm cutting out the Velcro, the pieces of Velcro. So I'm measuring here the length, and then I'm cutting it out. And for the distal end, I'm measuring it, but I'm also gonna make it a thinner strap since it goes around the palm. Now I'm rounding out the corners so that it doesn't get stuck on any other material. It usually holds onto the Velcro a bit better. And now we're placing the Velcro on. So here's the proximal strap and the middle strap. And see how it's thinner? The distal strap, I made it a bit thinner since it goes across the hand. And here is the completed splint.